The year was 1865, and the frontier had a way of stealing promises the same way it stole sunlight, quietly, mercilessly, without apology. Dawn crept through the warped slats of the old barn, sending thin blades of pale gold across the dirt floor, where Clara sat with her son pressed tightly against her side. She hadn't slept more than a handful of minutes at a time. Every creak in the rafters, every groan of the settling beams, every distant howl from the open plains set her nerves trembling like a taut wire ready to snap. She held Elias close, though he was old enough now to sit on his own, to ask too many questions, to look at her with the same troubled eyes his father once carried when danger licked at their heels. The boy's breath was warm against her arm. She watched him stir, eyelids fluttering, small fingers gripping the wooden horse Jacob had carved the winter before he left. Clara swallowed hard, pushing down the ache that rose every morning like a bruise forming beneath the skin. Jacob had promised he would return before the first snow melted. Now the snows were long gone, and summer's heat pressed in like a suffocating hand. A gust pushed through the cracks in the boards, sending dust swirling in a soft spiral. The particles caught the new light, as if suspended by fate itself. Clara watched them until they settled, then forced herself to stand. Her legs trembled from the hours spent on the barn's cold floor. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it offered no comfort, and brushed her fingers over the wooden crate that served as their makeshift table. Only crumbs remained from last night's meager supper. Elias rubbed his eyes and blinked up at her. "Mama," he whispered, "is Papa coming today?" Clara's heart twisted. She knelt, pushing a gentle smile onto her lips, even though it wavered at the edges. "He'll come when he can, sweetheart. Your papa keeps his promises." The boy nodded, trusting, though a shadow passed through his blue eyes. He rose slowly, clutching the toy horse, and stood beside her. There was something fragile in the way he leaned toward her, a silent plea for reassurance she could no longer offer honestly. She placed her hand atop his head, her fingers sinking into the soft curls Jacob had loved to ruffle. A distant sound broke the quiet. 3 knocks. Hard. Unfriendly. Clara stiffened. No one ever came to their barn this early unless they carried trouble on their boots. Elias moved behind her instinctively, the wooden horse tucked beneath his arm like a shield. Clara crossed the barn, each step scraping lightly against the dusty floor, and placed her hand on the rough plank door. Her pulse hammered beneath her skin. She slid back the latch. The stranger on the other side was tall, shoulders too broad to seem anything but threatening. His coat was worn, the leather cracked from years of sun and grit. A revolver hung low at his hip, and his hat sat low enough to cast his eyes in shadow. The smell of sweat and horse drifted in with him as he tipped the brim slightly, not out of courtesy, but habit. "You Clara Redden?" His voice had the scrape of stone dragged across dry earth. Clara didn't answer immediately. She felt Elias press against her skirt. "Who's asking?" "Name's Thorne," he said. "I'm looking for Jacob Redden." The bottom seemed to drop from her stomach. Still, she held her ground. "My husband ain't here." "I figured." Thorne's gaze slid past her, scanning the dim interior. "Word is he was in a skirmish near the Twin Creek trading post week back. Folks saw him running out the north entrance. Didn't say where he went, but..." He paused, eyes narrowing slightly. "You look like you ought to know something that..." Clara's throat tightened. She shook her head. "Jacob sent word months ago. Ain't heard nothing since." Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled behind the door. Thorne stepped closer. "Well, ma'am, if he's still breathing, he's in trouble. Men he crossed ain't the forgiving sort." He pulled in a breath and added, softer than she expected, "Figured you should know." Before Clara could respond, Thorne tipped his hat again, turned, and walked toward his horse tethered near the fence. His boots left deep impressions in the dust as if marking warning signs behind him. Without another word, he mounted up and rode east, disappearing into the haze. Clara shut the door with a shaky exhale. Her thoughts churned. If Jacob was alive, he was wounded, hunted, alone. The image tore at her. She leaned against the door a moment, forehead pressed to the wood. listening to the faint echo of Thorn's hooves fade into nothing. Elias stepped to her side. "Mama, Papa's hurt?" Clara knelt and pulled him close. "I don't know, baby." Her voice cracked. "But we can't stay here waiting anymore. Not if he needs us." The boy looked up at her, confusion flickering into determination. "I'll help, Mama." She cupped his cheek, brushing away a tear he didn't seem to notice shedding. "I know you will." The decision formed inside her like a flame catching old, dry timber, fast, fierce, unstoppable. She rose and began gathering what little they had: a threadbare blanket, a few tins of beans, a half-full canteen, Jacob's old pistol, with only 3 bullets left. Elias watched silently, his toy horse clutched to his chest. Outside, the wind picked up. The dusty plains shimmered beneath the rising sun, stretching far beyond what the eye could measure. It was a cruel landscape for anyone, let alone a woman and her young son. But Clara felt something stronger than fear, something born of love, desperation, and the weight of a promise she refused to let die. She stepped out of the barn, Elias's small hand wrapped in hers. The air carried the scent of heat and distant storms. Clara stared into the horizon, jaw set, heart pounding with a mix of dread and hope. "Jacob," she whispered, barely more than breath. "Hold on. We're coming." And with that, mother and child walked toward the unknown, leaving behind the last safe place they'd ever known. The cold blue of false dawn clung to the horizon when Alara pulled the worn saddlebag over her shoulder and stepped outside, her breath catching as the chill bit at her cheeks. Cole waited near the dying fire, tying down the last of their supplies with quick, sure movements. The boy, Caleb, stood a little distance away, clutching the small wooden horse his father had carved before leaving. His eyes traced the tree line with a hope too fragile for the wilderness. Alara felt that hope pressing on her like a weight. Whatever she'd promised the boy last night, she had no right to give. But a child didn't survive out here without something to hold on to. She'd learned that much the cruel way. Cole straightened, his face sharp with the resolve he tried to hide. Maybe he didn't want to be seen as the man who'd risked himself for a stranger and her child. Maybe helping them felt like a debt he'd rather avoid. But he was here and that mattered. "We ride north," he said. "There's a patrol path that cuts close to the river. Less open ground." Alara mounted, wincing at the bruises still burning along her ribs. She'd slept badly, every small noise tearing her awake with the fear that Marcus's riders had found them. Now, in the clear light, everything seemed sharper, more exposed. The silence didn't soothe, it warned. They moved fast. Cole led, his rifle slung across his back. Caleb rode, with Alara, small hands gripping the saddle horn as the mare navigated the rough trail. Birds scattered at their approach, wings beating feverishly. The forest felt tight around them, holding its breath. "How far until we're clear of them?" Alara asked. "Clear." Cole gave a humorless snort. "Not today. Maybe not this week." She knew it was the truth. Marcus Kane didn't stop. He took his claim back by force, no matter who broke under it. The man who'd promised to return to Caleb. That man had tried to stand against Marcus, and that had been enough to mark them all. They stopped only when the sun stretched high overhead. Cole motioned them into a narrow gulch lined with shale and brush. "Eat quick," he said. "We keep moving." Caleb slid from the saddle, his thin legs trembling with exhaustion. Alara knelt and offered him water. The boy drank, gaze shifting constantly back to the trail they'd come from. Cole crouched near the mouth of the gulch, scanning the open land. He had the look of someone who'd lost more than he'd ever admit. "You could still turn back," Alara said softly. "This isn't your fight." "Too late for that," he replied without looking at her. "I helped you." That's enough reason for Kane. Alara wanted to thank him, but the words felt brittle. Gratitude didn't survive this land any better than kindness. A sudden rustle cracked through the stillness. Cole's rifle snapped up. Alara reached for Caleb, pulling him close. A deer bounded out between the trees, hooves scattering shale. The boy's breath hitched. "It's nothing," Cole said, lowering the gun, but his eyes stayed hard. They ate intense silence, then mounted again. Hours passed under a tightening sky, clouds darkening like bruises. Cole pushed the pace, urging them toward the river's edge. The sound of rushing water reached them, a promise of cover, noise to mask trails. But as they neared the bank, Cole lifted a hand and froze. Ilara felt the dread hit her like a thrown stone. Horse tracks. Fresh. Deep. Too many. Cole motioned them back into a tangle of pines. Caleb clung to her, tiny fingers trembling. Voices drifted over the hill, men arguing the harsh clank of gear. Marcus's riders. They'd moved faster than expected. Cole edged closer, whispering, "If they spot us, we run. Straight for the water. Don't look back." Ilara nodded, though her heart thundered so hard she thought the riders would hear it. The men crested the ridge. Their shadows stretched long, distorted. Caleb sucked in a breath, and Ilara pressed a hand to his mouth. The riders paused, scanning the opposite slope, then moved on. Their voices faded. Only then did Ilara breathe again. "We follow the river upstream," Cole said. "Less likely they'll circle back that way." They moved parallel to the water, staying hidden beneath thick branches. Caleb leaned against her, drained. "Mama," he whispered, voice cracking, "is he coming back? Like he said?" The question struck sharper than any blade. She swallowed. "We keep moving toward him. That's all we can do." Cole glanced back, reading the truth she didn't say. Night crept over the land, cold and creeping. They found shelter beneath a granite outcrop, the wind howling like something alive. Cole struck a fire only big enough to warm their hands. Caleb slept quickly, exhaustion burying fear for a time. Ilara watched the flames flicker over Cole's face. He looked worn, older in the shifting light. "You still think he's alive?" Cole asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "If I don't believe that, I fall apart." "Hope keeps you moving," he said quietly. "But it also blinds you." She met his gaze. "Maybe, but it's all we have." A howl rose in the distance, wolves. Cole's hand went to his rifle, but he didn't stand. Ilara felt the weight of everything settling around them. Marcus's pursuit, the wilderness pressing closer, the promise she was dragging through miles of danger. Cole shifted, his voice low. "Tomorrow gets rougher." She nodded. She didn't need the warning. She could feel the storm gathering in the night, heavy and certain, waiting for dawn to break and carry them into whatever came next. As the fire dimmed, Ilara stayed alert, listening to the wind drag through the pines. Each distant crack stirred dread, yet she held tight to the small thread of belief that kept her moving. Somewhere out there, the man Caleb waited for might still be fighting to reach them, and she refused to let the night steal that hope. She whispered a promise into darkness tonight. The morning broke hard and colorless, a thin pale light spreading over the canyon like a blade being drawn. Ilara stood at the ridge's edge, staring down into the jagged throat of stone and shadow below. Cole knelt beside a cluster of tracks pressed deep into the dust, fresh boot prints, wagon ruts, and the unmistakable drag of something heavy being hauled. Caleb clung to Ilara's coat, silent but wide-eyed, sensing that whatever lay ahead carried a weight far beyond the fear he already understood. Cole rose, jaw tight, eyes flint-hard. "This is it," he said. "Kane's men didn't bother to cover their trail. They think no one's fool enough to follow." Ilara breathed deep, tasted the harsh minerals of the canyon, and felt her heartbeat crack against her ribs. She didn't know if she was walking into salvation or ruin, but turning back had never been an option. They descended slowly, the path steep and crumbling beneath their boots. Loose stones skittered away into the canyon, echoing off sharp walls. Every sound felt too loud, too dangerous. Caleb stumbled, and Ilara steadied him, offering a faint smile, though her throat was tight with dread. Cole signaled for silence, raising 2 fingers, then pointed toward a narrow passage carved by centuries of storm water. Smoke drifted faintly from beyond it, voices murmuring, metal clinking, the telltale rustle of men preparing for trouble. Ilara swallowed and gripped the pistol Jacob had left behind, the metal cold enough to sting. She wasn't a marksman, but she'd fire if she had to. She'd become anything she needed to be for the boy beside her and the man who'd promised to return. They crept forward, pressed against the canyon wall. The passage widened into a clearing sheltered by massive stones blackened with old fire marks. Horses were tied near a charred log. 3 men paced the camp, their rifles slung lazily but within easy reach. Kane's red-brand coat hung from a fallen stump like a warning flag. Cole leaned close to Alara, whispering, "We have one chance. We move fast, hit first, take them by surprise." Alara nodded, though her breath shook. She scanned the shadows for any sign of Jacob, forcing hope into the spaces where terror tried to settle. Caleb tugged her sleeve and pointed to the far corner, where a slumped form lay chained to a post. Alara's vision blurred for a moment, her body nearly buckling, but she steadied herself and looked closer. It was him. Jacob's head hung low, his hair matted with blood and dirt. His shirt was torn, his wrists raw from the shackles, but his chest moved, barely, weakly, but undeniably alive. Alara felt a quiet sob claw at her throat, but she forced it back. There was no room for emotion yet. Cole tapped her arm, signaling the final moment before everything shattered into violence. She pulled Caleb close, whispering, "Stay behind the rocks. Don't move until I tell you." The boy nodded, tears trembling but not falling. Then Cole stepped forward and fired. The shot cracked through the canyon like a lightning strike. One of Kane's men dropped instantly, clutching his shoulder. The camp erupted into chaos, shouts, scrambling boots, rifles being cocked. Alara sprang from cover, firing at the second man as he spun toward Cole. Her bullet struck the ground at his feet, but it startled him long enough for Cole to tackle him hard into the dust. The third man raised his rifle toward her, and time seemed to constrict into a single breath. Before he could fire, a sharp whistle sliced through the air, followed by the dull thud of a rock smashing into his temple as Caleb hurled it with desperate force. The man crumpled. Alara ran to Jacob, dropping to her knees, so abruptly the dirt scraped her skin. "Jacob," she whispered, hands trembling as she reached for him. His eyelids fluttered. He struggled to lift his head, voice no more than a dry rasp. "Alara, you came." She pressed her forehead to his, choking on relief. "We're getting you out. Hold on." Cole rushed over, cutting the chain with a small iron tool he carried. Jacob sagged into Alara's arms, weak but conscious, eyes drifting toward Caleb. "Hey, there, little rider," he murmured. Caleb threw his arms around his father, crying into his torn shirt. A sharp crack snapped Alara's head up. Far off, another rifle firing. Cole cursed. "Kane's coming. We need to move." He dragged one of the fallen men's rifles toward Alara. "Take it. Cover me." She nodded, hoisting Jacob with her free arm as Cole helped pull him upright. They half-carried, half-dragged Jacob across the clearing as shouts echoed from the canyon mouth. Dust plumed as riders thundered toward them, Kane at the front, broad-shouldered, cruel-eyed, his black coat streaming behind him like smoke. "Run!" Cole shouted. Alara pushed forward, heart beating like a war drum. The canyon path twisted ahead, narrow and treacherous. Hooves hammered closer. Cole fired over his shoulder, forcing the riders to scatter. Alara stumbled, nearly losing her grip on Jacob. But Caleb shoved his shoulder under his father's arm with fierce determination. "We're almost there," Alara gasped, though she wasn't sure it was true. A gunshot struck the rock beside her, shattering stone into sharp fragments that sliced her arm. She gritted her teeth, tightening her grip. They reached a split in the canyon, just as Kane's riders surged into view. Cole stood between them and the family, rifle raised. "Go," he barked. "I'll hold them." Alara hesitated, only a heartbeat, then dragged Jacob and Caleb down the left path. Cole's rifle cracked again and again, echoing long after he vanished behind the bend. Alara finally emerged onto a high ridge overlooking miles of open land. The wind hit her sharply, carrying the scent of sage and freedom. Jacob leaned heavily against her, breath ragged. "You saved me," he whispered. "No," she said, brushing dirt from his face. "We saved each other." Caleb took Jacob's hand. The sun edged higher, painting the ridge gold. Behind them, gunshots faded into distant silence, swallowed by the canyon walls. The danger wasn't gone, not yet, but they were alive, together, and moving toward a future that finally held more hope than fear. And for the first time in months, Ilera felt the promise of something brighter waiting just beyond the horizon.